Euranet Plus Panorama is a weekly review of European news broadcast by our network of EU radio stations.
Hi there, welcome back to Euranet Plus Panorama. Trump has been patting himself on the back after NATO leaders agreed to increase defence spending to 5% of GDP by 2025. This figure is made up of 3.5% on pure defence spending and 1.5% for related expenditure such as developing critical infrastructure, resilience and the industrial base for defence. Following the NATO summit in The Hague on Wednesday, the 25th of June, the US president is celebrating what he considers a personal victory, despite the deadline of 2035 being a longer one than he and some others had been pushing for. He's also basking in the glow of a great deal of attention from his fellow leaders, with a particularly obsequious display from NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, attracting much criticism in the European media. Many commentators are suggesting that this whole exercise was in fact nothing more than an exercise in massaging Trump's ego and getting the US back on side. But when Latvia's president, Edgar Rinkēvičs, who's a firm proponent of this increased defence spending, was asked by journalists, including our colleague at Latvia's radio, if he felt at all humiliated by all the praises the US president has been showered with over recent days, he gave a sharp riposte.
It is more humiliating what we have done to ourselves over the years. Now we have woken up all of a sudden and become very emotional. Personally, I am unemotional about the way we work with one ally or another. I am more emotional about the fact that we have let ourselves down up to now, and that everyone has only woken up because someone from outside has told us to.
And German Chancellor Friedrich Merz insists, as he made clear in a statement delivered to the Bundestag just ahead of Wednesday's summit, that these latest developments inside NATO are not motivated by a desire to do the US any favours. His words are shared by AMS.
Wir tun das nicht, wie vereinzelt behauptet.
We are not doing this, as is occasionally claimed, to do the USA and its president a favour. We are doing this out of our own perception and conviction because Russia, in particular, is actively and aggressively threatening the security and freedom of the entire Euro-Atlantic region, and because we fear that Russia will take the war beyond Ukraine. We are doing this with a shared conviction that together we must be so strong that no one will dare to attack us. That is why we find ourselves in a historic situation. In this situation, Germany must also take responsibility, and that is what we are doing.
In dieser Situation muss auch Deutschland Verantwortung übernehmen, und das tun wir.
Yet speaking to Renascença, João Oliveira, an MEP from the European Parliament's Left Group, strongly criticises NATO for organising an event that, in his view, only served to benefit the United States.
Donald Trump is neither a defender of peace nor on the road to the peace that we need to build. He continues, like previous American presidents, to manage war and militarism to suit American interests. And let nobody be under any illusions. The increase in military spending being agreed at this NATO summit is to support the US military-industrial complex and to enrich the large US corporations that profit from and do business at the expense of death and destruction.
Oliveira also regrets that Portugal will be spending money on defence that could be channelled into health and education. But on the doorstep of the meeting of the 32 heads of state and government in The Hague, the Portuguese PM, Luís Montenegro, confirmed that Portugal would meet the 3.5% target in so-called pure defence spending without jeopardising other important areas.
We have the prospect of being able to invest 3.5% of GDP over the next 10 years. But what is important for us to ensure is that we do this with balance, reconciling all our responsibilities, namely financial stability and, through this, the responsibility we have to ensure that Portuguese citizens continue to receive full social support. So we must not jeopardize any of our public policy axes with this increased investment.
There are calls, though, to ensure progress is steady. The scenario NATO wants to avoid is certain allies leaving it until the last minute to act, as some have done with the 2% target. Indeed, This threshold is only finally to be achieved by some NATO members, such as Belgium, this year. Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever told reporters outside the summit that, albeit a challenge, reaching 3.5% within 10 years was doable. Yet the country's deputy PM and foreign minister, Maxime Prévost, had told RTBF just on Tuesday that achieving 3.5% was, and I quote, out of our budgetary reach. In fact, this is unsurprising, given that his government is still struggling to work out how to finance the increase to 2% by the end of this year. So you might wonder, why would Belgium sign up to an even higher target? Because, says Prévost, they have some ground to make up.
We have been one of the worst performers, of course, for a very long time. So, our allies' patience is now wearing thin. This is why we need to show a willingness to get back in line with reliable partners, but at a pace that remains sustainable for our finances.
Spain was the only country to formally hold back from committing to the higher defence investment target, despite signing the joint statement at the end of the summit. Prime Minister Sanchez seems to be on board with the level of defence capability required from his country, but believes it is realistic for Spain to meet this without paying any more than 2.1%. Es Radio reports.
Una inversión que consideramos suficiente.
This is an investment that we consider sufficient, realistic, and something that is also very important for Spain, compatible with our social model, with our welfare state, with the international and multilateral commitments that are also fundamental for Spain's development, stability, and prosperity.
La prosperidad de España.
As such, Madrid seems to have achieved a derogation of sorts, allowing it to chart its own sovereign path to meeting the capability target. Trump's response to this? Well, suffice to say, Spain should brace itself for impact.
I think it's terrible. And, they're doing very well. The economy is very well. So we'll make it up. You know what we're going to do? We're negotiating with Spain on a trade deal. We're going to make them pay twice as much. Spain is the only country out of all of the countries that refuses to pay. But they'll have to pay it back to us on trade because I'm not going to let that happen. It's unfair.
Although other NATO allies have their doubts about the new target, none of them have formally asked for the same flexibility as Spain. But, as Belgium's Prévost points out, this doesn't mean negotiations have not been taking place behind closed doors.
We may not have made a flashy declaration like Spain did, but I can assure you that our diplomats have been working for weeks to obtain the flexibility mechanisms that are expected. Of course, we will embrace anything that can help ease the Belgian burden, and we are happy to do so. Now, don't get us wrong, we're not going to be able to have à la carte targets. The threshold that has to be reached by one country or another cannot vary according to the mood of the country. The very principle of NATO is one of solidarity, and so the objective must be the same for everyone. Although each country must be able to move forward at its own pace, in the light of its reality, within its public opinion, and above all, its budgetary reality.
Bucharest, on the other hand, sees no issue with the 5% target. The question is when, not if, says the new Romanian president, Nicoșor Dan. Radio Romania reports.
As you know, there were discussions on 5% and 2035. Romania was ready to agree to 2032. Let's see how we balance the economy in the next year and a half, and then we can talk about targets. The target regarding 2035 is assumed.
Commenting on the increase in European defence spending, Clyda Kuhl, a former Estonian ambassador to France, Germany, the EU and NATO, suggests to Kuku Radio that this recent development is more about blinding people with numbers than the actual expansion of defence capabilities.
Kahetsusväärselt on praegu see tippkohtumine rohkem läinud raamatupidamiseks.
It is unfortunate that this summit has become more of an accounting exercise than a credible reinforcement of NATO's defence capabilities. Of course, all the signals they are trying to give are aimed at demonstrating the unity of the alliance. After all, Europe has been in the shadow of American support and defence spending for decades. This change that has come about with the second coming of President Trump, namely the increase in Europe's own defence capabilities, is a painful process. It's not like you can refinance your common needs overnight.
niimoodi, et sa päevapealt suudad nagu ümber rahastada oma ühiskondlikud vajadused.
NATO's Secretary-General, on the other hand, considers that the compromise reached by the Allies will fuel a quantum leap in the defence of the alliance. Yet he warns that the work has only just begun.
Work does not stop here. This is day one. And part of this requires that we rapidly expand our defence industrial capacity on both sides of the Atlantic. We need quality and quantity. We need to innovate and we need to act fast.
The final declaration reaffirms the Allies' ironclad commitment to the principle that an attack on one NATO member would lead to a response from the full alliance. It additionally mentions the long-term threat posed by Russia, reiterates the Allies' pledge to provide support to Ukraine, and states that direct contributions to Kyiv's defence can be counted as part of a nation's core defence spending. Great, the deal is done. But in an interview for BNR, economist Adrian Nikolov from the Institute for Market Economics in Sofia asks a key question. What mechanisms are available to help the EU's NATO members hike up their defence spending in the required time frame?
On the one hand, there is talk of relaxing the budget deficit rules, that is, not classing military spending as an additional budget spending according to EU fiscal rules. In other words, we should get some form of concession from the usual fiscal discipline. That sounds plausible, but most European countries, especially in Western Europe, are already running budget deficits well above the Maastricht Treaty limits. As such, even if they were willing to spend more on defence, they will find it very difficult to do so.
So, what other options are available then?
Perhaps the most realistic approach, and the easiest to achieve, is to reformat European instruments. The Cohesion Fund is the most likely because this is aimed at building infrastructure and enterprise capacity in the first place, and these seem the most accessible funds to redirect.
All will likely become clearer in the days and weeks to come. But one thing's for certain, opinions over this latest turn of events will diverge markedly. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for another tour of the Euranet Plus network.